I think the challenge to democracy is not unique to COVID. It's always present because the species, the DNA, is naturally inclined towards executive power, if you will, even a tyranny. The species likes to have a father figure, tells them if you do X, Y, Z, you'll go to heaven. You don't have to think for yourself or be morally responsible for your actions because there's someone at the top, the king, the queen, whoever, will dictate to you. That's the natural tendency of all species, including the human species. We're the only one with the mental brain power to decide that is not satisfactory. We have our dignity that comes as individuals from self-government. And let me quote from the Declaration of Independence of the United States that speaks in terms of universals, that they viewed these truths as self-evident. All men and women are created equal, and we are all endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice and wisdom. That's a contemporary definition of pursuit of happiness. And that all legitimate governments are based upon the consent of the governed. These precepts must be inculcated in the culture for a democracy to thrive, because a democracy is not simply majority rule. Majorities can be every bit as tyrannical as one particular person. But democracies thrive when there's a culture that supports tolerance, wisdom, understanding, recognizing that the glory of any nation is liberty. It's not domination, conquest, control. And even more lethal to democracy than COVID or these kinds of medical emergencies is war. The scourge of war has beset mankind from the outset. And the scourge of war is the death knell of democracy. There is no rule of law in times of war, as Cicero noted. And we understand that wars are precipitated by a culture that's philosophically empty, that seeks to find self-expression and self-esteem over dominating others, tribalism. That has to be opposed in the classroom, in the home, in the pulpit, everywhere. The culture of democracy will die in a state of perpetual warfare. And that is unfortunately what we confront today. If we look around the world where there's conflict and warfare, whether it's in Libya or the Congo, the Uyghurs in China, anyway, it would take too long to identify all those instances of oppression where it comes from a culture that simply will not sustain democracy, protection of minority rights. And you cannot simply summon a democracy into being saying, well, let's protect human rights. Let's be tolerant. Let's be educated. You have to have an actual architecture that will implement and further those objectives. And what is the architecture that we came upon in the United States? It wasn't thinking that we would turn men and women into angels and then we would say, all right, now we've achieved democracy and our liberties. No, they developed separation of powers. If democracy is to thrive, you must have ambition counteracting ambition. We in the United States did it by having a legislative body, an executive body, and a judicial body, coupled with a constitution that set norms of behavior that no majority could violate. Even 99% couldn't violate because they're fundamental to human existence. The right to not to be deprived of property or liberty without due process of law. Due process, perhaps the most important concept in the history of civilization, that you could be wrong, you have an opportunity to confront your accusers, to cross-examine, to an impartial decision maker. All of those attributes of fairness must be relevant and present in a culture for democracy to thrive. As I say, the tendency is one person rule when we find it so many places around the world. Shortly after Arab Spring was announced from Tunisia in 2011, I told my colleagues, this is going to fail. It's going to turn into Arab winter for a simple reason. It's easy to get consensus against tyranny. Everyone feels it, the sting. But to have the wisdom and understanding in order to build a new democratic dispensation that cherishes liberty, that cherishes the rule of law, by architecting the dispersal of power so no one faction has authority to persecute another, that's a real challenge. And that comes by wisdom. Now, we all understand that we need a good heart as well. We need to have good intentions, but that by itself is not going to bring democracy. The challenge that we confront is a challenge that existed for thousands of years. The human species is not inclined naturally to embrace liberty. I say you just look around all over the world and see that's not the natural course of events. And what we need to do if we're going to have democracy thrive is see how essential it is in every aspect of our lives to say we need to act on wisdom, tolerance. We could be wrong. We have to have due process. We have to protect the rights of minority, that our glory is protecting others, to have every benevolent instinct of the human heart guide our behavior. Those are in some sense more important even within what you can write down on a piece of paper in a constitution, because it's easy to flout something that's written down. In the United States today, we confront a crisis in constitutional adherence, a democracy, if you will, because we are flouting the Constitution. We recently had a president echoing a former one saying, and then on Article 2 of our Constitution, I have the right to do anything I want as president. No, you don't have a right to do that under the Constitution. That is a formula for what? Tyranny. And one person has the right to do anything he wants as president. And we now have in the United States, unfortunately, setting, I think, a bad role model for others. A single individual sitting in the White House can decide based on secret evidence that he can extinguish any life if he decides someone's a threat to the national security. That is not democracy. That is tyranny. You can extinguish life on your own and there's no accountability. It is all classified information. So this is a challenge that we have to recognize is not driven by COVID-19 or statements that you have to have vaccinations or not. Those are small things compared to our liberty, the right to have private conversations not intercepted by the government, the right to have a fair and open trial, the right to pursue our goals and objectives and ambitions free from domestic predation and foreign aggression. Those are challenges that we confront every single day, and we will long after COVID-19 has been vanished from the planet. So those are the things that I wanted to convey. Don't think that this is just a temporary kind of problem aggravated by the pandemic. It isn't. It's far deeper, goes into who we are as human beings. And we need to recognize that this is a real challenge, that you don't acquire wisdom by 10 minutes looking on your cell phone. I've read 20,000 books. It's really hard stuff. It's very difficult because we're all naturally narcissistic in the species. We don't really think that there can be other species that are doing that we are superior to them. We say, well, we must be superior because we dominate the world. But you have to ask, what is it about the human being that gives them the moral justification for saying we're superior to these other species? And they're endless ones. Those have been extinct, those who are present here. We need to answer those questions. Why do we exist? And justice is the end game. And that's the final point I want to make. The whole reason why we organize in societies is to pursue justice. Now, it's true, justice is not as precise as Euclidean geometry. We get a sense of it. It's perhaps more a mood than a particular sum. But that's why we exist and when we come together. That has to be our goal as citizens, wherever we are, in whatever society. And there are examples in my judgment. They're going to be sacrifices, but they're true heroes. If you want to, in my judgment, get an inspiration of what it means to secure democracy, remember Tank Man. He was the elderly man during Tiananmen Square who laid down in front of a tank and said, oh, you want to kind of trust, you want to suppress liberty, then you can kill me. He walked right into that kind of danger, totally fearless. The kind of spirit of Socrates, I will take the hemlock rather than give up the examining life in the morality of the city or the city-state of Athens at that particular time. These are the heartbeat, I say, of civilization that makes us rise above the animal kingdom. And we have to keep that in the forefront every day. It is a big challenge. It means you have to give up the weekends drinking beer or having your social life because their tendency 24 hours a day. Tyranny is always on the march. There are always people who want limitless power over you. It never sleeps. And if we are not vigilant, we will lose it all. And we need to recognize that democracy is not an endpoint. It's a process. It's the spirit by which you live. It's the spirit by which you discharge your obligations as citizens. Those are the things that will keep democracy alive and thriving. If it is absent in the human heart and the spirit, I don't care what you can write down on a piece of paper, it will not survive. And unfortunately, in the United States, in my judgment, we're suffering a constitutional crisis. We still have our document with amendments crafted, what I think, were the wisest minds, perhaps in the history of civilization, in creating our Constitution, 1787, and September 17th. It's only a few days from today. And we're not honoring it because we no longer master its underlying precepts and philosophy. And I'll end there. I always take account of Samuel Johnson's wisdom about Paradise Lost. None ever wished it were longer. And I'm sure that's true of the audience. And thank you for your patience.
This is a very powerful presentation, very powerful keynote, especially who are not familiar with law and constitution. Thank you so much for bringing and putting in a very concise context to transmit the message to us. Yes, indeed, it is not only related with the COVID, but we need all and every time. So based on your works and books, we although haven't gone through those, what cultural attributes are necessary for democracy to flourish?
Well, the most important attribute, and here we can get some inspiration from Costa Rica, you need to have a culture that is against war and violence except in self-defense. Liberty and democracy goes right down the drain as soon as you're at war and not in self-defense. So that is critical. And we've tried to achieve that in the United States by entrusting exclusively the war power to the legislative body, which doesn't profit by war. The executive gets the aggrandizement of war. They have limitless power. They build monuments and obelisks, like Napoleon. When you're the chief, you're the commander in chief, and you win great war. Right? And that doesn't happen in Congress. Unfortunately, in the United States, we've surrendered that cultural understanding, and now presidents go to war on their own. They can do secret warfare, which is even more alarming in an era of cyberspace. The president could stand up one day and say, oh, we've been attacked by China. The cyber is attacking our critical infrastructure. How would we even know whether that's true? Yeah, oftentimes you don't even know where the originator of a cyber attack is. And we don't have congressional oversight anymore. It's turned into, I sometimes call our Congress an ink blot. Now, Ralph Nader, a friend, said, no, actually, it's a perfect vacuum. There's just nothing there, no matter there. Because the United States, unfortunately, has cast aside democracy and a republic because we want to be an empire and rule the world. Extend our military force everywhere, 800 bases, aircraft carriers, drones everywhere we send them. Invading sovereignties as they at our whim, and say you're guaranteed to lose a democracy if you're at war, except in self-defense to aggression.
No, thank you so much for the explanatory response. Indeed, it's mind-opening. And the next one is, why is the natural tendency of all political cultures towards monarchical executive rule?
Yes, I've read at length Charles Darwin's Origin of Species and Descent of Man, and then the history of the Earth. There have been more than 20 million species, and every one of them exhibits simply one person, one member of the species being the top dog, if you will, organizing and directing the others. We have evolved from these species, and we're naturally inclined towards that same tendency of just having one person, a king or a queen or whatever, to look up, revere. They will give us the playbook that makes us happy, because it is in the DNA to crave certainty. It's very difficult to deal with the uncertainties, if you will. I call them the chiaroscuro, the grayness of life and moral judgments. But as human beings, we have to be accountable for those decisions. We can't surrender those decisions to somebody else. You can't delegate it. And that's what we have to fight against all of the time. This tendency, let somebody else decide. I don't want to be involved. It's somebody else who needs to make life simple for me. And it is simple in some respects. But then you don't have to use your brain. You just follow what somebody else tells you. But down that road lies disaster, and it no longer respects dignity. The essence of being a human being is being morally accountable and welcoming the opportunity to chart your own destiny, to march your own drummer. We're all going to make mistakes. Saints have past, sinners have futures. We learn by trial and error, but it's the effort itself That's the key to happiness and to success and thriving as a species.
Thank you so much. It is very well received message, which all we need. We need hope and we need to be positive in order to challenge. So thank you so much, Mr. Bruce Fein. And now I'd like to welcome to